ever.
Bad deal, should have never been thought of.
Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, November 8th, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks on a Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Joseph Cirincione, he's the president of the Ploughshare Fund. We're talking about Donald Trump's threats to pull out of a vital arms control treaty. Has Russia already been violating the very same terms of that same treaty? The Iran deal, gutted, but maybe still in effect for most of the world. And the future of making sure that we don't destroy humankind. Jeff Sessions is out. Don't forget that his greatest policy legacy is torturing children. But Donald Trump may have found his Roy Cohn after all, and certainly a guy whose business instincts he can respect, with a new acting attorney general, Whitaker, apparently implicated in a massive swindle in Florida. Sounds like a perfect Trump appointee. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wishing her a speedy return to full health with 3 fractured ribs. Wishing her all the best, and wishing maybe that she had let Obama fill her seat. But also recognizing that none of this will matter if we don't introduce term limits and court packing. DSA and other progressive left causes and candidates fared well down ballot across the country and in key ballot initiatives, including expanding Medicaid in Idaho. 12 killed at a bar shooting in Ventura, California. Donald Trump and his administration revoking Jim Acosta's press pass. And there might be a little bit of fake news involved in this revoking. Jair Bolsonaro announces that he will be increasing the salaries of the Supreme Court justices and other justices who put the man who would have beat him, Lula da Silva, in prison, even as the same U.S.-backed prosecutor who waged a vendetta against Lula and the Workers' Party is now ignoring corruption in Bolsonaro circles and taking a job in the fascist administration as justice minister. Justin Trudeau, while acknowledging Canada's past crimes towards the Jewish people, makes a ridiculous attack on those working for rights and justice for all in the Middle East. And why is it that Benjamin Netanyahu is so cozy with the global far right, but loathes the EU? That is a rhetorical question. All that, plus there are ballots. What was that? Oh, go for it. Sure.
So-called progressives are actually regressive.
There's still ballots to be counted in Florida and Georgia. It's a big uphill battle, but I love it. They're going to a runoff. Never concede.
December 4th, I believe, right?
Never. I believe it's December 4th. And we should not treat that election as legitimate with Brian Kemp's mass voter suppression.
And Kemp has now resigned as a Secretary of State.
Right. Good time before all the court cases piling up for his suppression and theft of the election, for him to bow out. All that and more on today's Majority Report. Yesterday, we played a clip of Donald Trump freaking out at Jim Acosta. Donald Trump is usually pretty good at these things because he's a decent lounge comic, but yesterday he clearly was having sort of rage-anxiety, would you call it? On one hand, saying he was looking forward to work with the Democrats and with Nancy, and it would be so great to be bipartisan, but on the other hand, being like, yo, do not look into my finances. I mean, one can imagine.
It's a hoax.
It's a total hoax. I mean, could you imagine, even if somehow it came up that there was nothing to the Russia story, and there's something to it, I don't doubt, although obviously it's been overinflated by resistance types, but there's something to it. But just the idea that you have a team of financial crimes investigators combing through Donald Trump's businesses. I mean, the amount of criminal activity that they're probably running across, from like, petty scams to connections with like organized crime figures from everywhere.
Real estate's a very clean industry.
Right. Real estate, casinos, and Trump. No crimes there.
No crimes.
No crimes.
Oh, fake news.
Nope. Fake news.
Fake justice, folks.
Fake justice, fake crimes. No fake crimes, no peace. So he's freaking out, and things came to a head with Jim Acosta, and they've revoked Jim Acosta's press credentials. And let's watch this. They're saying it's because Jim Acosta physically attacked a White House intern who attempted to retrieve his microphone from him. We're going to watch this exchange, and this, at least from this angle, this reminds me of the infamous Maxine Waters assaulted me incident. But let's take a look.
If I may ask
Peter,
one other
ahead.
question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's
Mr.
enough.
President, I
That's
was
enough.
going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask, on the Russia.
Okay, so basically it looks like she's, the intern's actually pretty aggressively moving to take his mic.
Yeah, the intern scored well on the authoritarian,
Yes.
following orders thing. Because I just want to point one thing. Just look at the way she looks at Trump here. Like, can you make him give me the microphone? It just looks gross.
Very creepy and very servile.
That's
I was going to
enough.
ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr.
Excuse
President,
me. That's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other
Peter,
question,
let's
if
go.
I may ask.
That is so
That's
bizarre.
so creepy.
That is so creepy. And also even shows that she even has some sense of fear. Like, she's just an
She
intern.
knows she's doing something wrong.
She knows she's doing something wrong, but she also knows that he might blow up and freak out on her even. And, so she's put, no sympathy
That's a
for
good
her,
point.
but I don't really have any, but she's in an impossible situation. The President of the United States is asking an intern to actively suppress the press.
You know what I would do? I would
Yeah.
not consider that an impossible situation. I would consider that a meal ticket, and I would resign.
Right, I would say, right, exactly. No, Mr. President, I will not be a brown shirt for you. And then she would get booked on every single talk show on the planet, and probably could actually write a pretty funny White House memoir. I'm sure even interns have endless numbers of anecdotes about the stupidity, grotesqueness, and nonsense of this administration. Now, we make a lot about the racism of the Republican Party, but there are two people that, if we're being intellectually honest, who are African American. They're women, in fact, and they have a strong influence on Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and that is, of course, the crucial political analysts, the duo known as Diamond and Silk. They're not only political analysts, they're also recording artists. They're respected rappers and contributors regularly on all Fox properties. And they had some thoughts for Lou Dobbs, which, of course, was, I'm sure, getting funneled directly back to the White House while Donald Trump anxiously slurped a milkshake. Sorry for the disgusting image. It could have been worse.
Well, yeah, it's time for Acosta for his press credentials to be removed. Yeah. It's very sad that he don't understand as a journalist. He is supposed to report news, not make the news and not be the news. And yes, he is the enemy of the people. Not only that, but the enemy of the truth. He's very disrespectful, very disparaging. And you know what? Why is he even in there? He don't even need to go to the White House anymore and report anything because we don't even want to hear it anymore.
Wow.
So 13 minutes after that aired, Acosta was notified that his credentials had been revoked.
So 13 minutes after the word came down from the Diamond and Silk High Command, Jim Acosta's press credentials were revoked in what is both a hilarious and ridiculous comedy and also an objective authoritarian attack on the free press. Right around the time, and I guess this was the time this was announced, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who every single journalist right now should be embarrassed if they defended her from some jokes a couple of months ago.
Unfair.
Yeah, unfair. To old Smoky Eye herself, Sarah Huckabee Sanders tweeted out this video of Trump, Acosta, and the intern. Now, we played you the original video, but is there something we missed here? Because look, obviously, if Jim Acosta hit an intern, we would be the first ones to say, yeah, you actually can't do that. So let's check out this video. And is this either still the Maxine Waters incident? Is this Gianforte or Maxine Waters? Well, we have a second video. Let's check it out. It's up on screen now. And
I mean, it doesn't look a whole lot different, but
it doesn't look a whole lot different, but it looks like
they've isolated the karate chop here.
They isolated. So what they've done is they've slowed this down, and what they should have done is they should have put like a Bruce Lee sound effect over it, and he would have been like, "Hiya, Hadouken," and so to make it look, because basically what really happened, you could see, is she's actually going after him and trying to rip his mic out of his hand, which, if we're being, pedantic here, that is where, the actual assault or whatever takes place. So obviously there was no assault or really. The physical part of this is nothing. The part of this is the president and an intern trying to literally rip a mic out of a reporter's hands because the president's having an authoritarian
You can mute the
tantrum.
microphone. These are electronic things. These aren't analog devices.
This is true. The microphone can be muted. So, but what they've done...
Raphael Shimunov on Twitter posted this video where he overlaid the original C-SPAN clip with the one that was tweeted out by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary of the United States of America. And it turns out that there was some clever fast-forwarding and slow-mowing, very subtle, to make it look like the chop was more aggressive.
Like he was kind of hitting her aggressively, like, hey, get out of my face.
Yeah, so here it is. I'll just scrub over this and you can kind of see there's a transparent overlay. So the red, you can see the difference between the two clips there.
Can you guys see that? So in the real one, it's just sort of like a natural motion. He's actually pointing his finger at Trump to say something, and their arms brushed together. And then they fast forward it to look like he was actually chopping down on her arm, which actually, it's funny. He wasn't even doing that minorly.
No,
like that just literally wasn't happening.
He was maybe reacting to the fact that like an arm was reaching across where he was gesturing, right?
Right.
And then immediately after in the original clip, he's like, "Pardon me, ma'am, I'm trying to ask a question." He wasn't karate chopping. It wasn't Bruce Lee.
He was not Bruce Lee-ing an intern. So where did this sped up fake video, by the way, very subtle and well done, where did this video come from that Sarah Sanders, old Smoky Eye herself, tweeted out? Oh my God. Soy-phobic health expert Paul Joseph Watson, the depressed, beleaguered British arm of Alex Jones's InfoWars.
Imagine my shock. Well, imagine my shock. Imagine my shock. Imagine my shock. Well, imagine my shock. Well, imagine my shock. Well, imagine my shock. Imagine my shock.
Well, Paul Joseph Watson has spoken multiple times for all of us this morning. Imagine our shock. So, just to make this very clear and put a button on it, the president had a tantrum over a question. An intern attempted to rip a mic out of a reporter's hand. The president continued his tantrum. Then a pair of internet personalities went on internet grifters went on Fox Business and said this journalist should have his credentials pulled. 13 minutes later, the White House press secretary announced that his credentials would be pulled and tweeted out a fake video by a doctored video by a alt-right extremist news outlet
that had been banned by Twitter.
That had been banned
by
YouTube and iTunes and several other platforms. So, yeah. Aces.
That's where we're at.
This is great. This is where we're at. And in a couple of minutes, I'm going to talk with Joseph Cirincione about how this same administration might be working to dismantle the entire arms control infrastructure of the globe, which has managed to keep us from essentially eliminating the viability of life on planet Earth since the beginning of the Cold War. So, great stuff. Everybody, have a drink. Today's sponsor is newsvoice.com. We all know that media conglomerates and concentrations of news are a danger to public discourse, and that people live in more and more epistemic bubbles. Even if you are focusing and want opinion and analysis, obviously, you still need a sort of broad sense of the political landscape so you can understand the opposition. You can understand how people think, and you also can support your arguments across the board with the best empirical evidence available. There's a news company that has come up with its own response to these problems. It's called Newsvoice. It's an app for iOS and Android, which you can access for free if you go to newsvoice.com/majority. And it gives you a personalized news feed by aggregating a mix of mainstream media sources, international sources, and independent media sources. Multiple sources are provided for each news story. The entire app is fueled by crowdsourcing. You can upvote stories you think are important so more people will see them. You can add stories to the app, or you can add a source that's missing for a story. It's meant to be completely open and democratized news aggregator that lets you get every side of every story. They also have a video interview series featuring guests from Chris Hedges to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Go down the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority, and we've put a link to it under this video if you're watching on YouTube. We're going to take a brief break, and we will be right back with Joseph Cirincione. He's the president of the Ploughshare Fund. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Joseph Cirincione. He is the president of the Ploughshare Fund. Joseph, thanks so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure, Michael.
So, Joseph, before we get to some of the specifics of what President Trump has indicated he might do with regards to intermediate missile treaty, can you sort of reset everything for us? What is the global infrastructure of arms control agreements? Both, maybe you could give us just a sort of overview, including bilateral agreements between the United States and Russia, and also international agreements that many countries are still signed onto. What is the sort of basis upon which we've built a world where, miraculously these things have not been used since the atrocities in Japan?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. I teach a course at Georgetown University Graduate School, so I have an hour-and-a-half lecture on exactly this topic. How much time do we have?
Take an hour. Actually, that's great. I'll sit back. I'll go grab a coffee and listen to my headphones.
We can do this real quick. I mean, it's the basic themes are pretty simple. Ever since the first atomic bomb in Hiroshima, there's been two impulses in the world, and one is we got to get rid of these things, and the other is we got to get some of these things. And those two trends have really weaved in and out globally and nationally, and sometimes one trend dominates and sometimes the other. And the efforts to control the bomb started even before the bomb was exploded. Some of the scientists who were involved in the building of the bomb realized we need a system of control, so this could destroy humanity. And various presidents took various steps on this. I think the most significant step that most people think is John F. Kennedy, where he negotiated with the Soviets in the early 60s to have a limited test ban treaty in response to massive worldwide pressure to stop the atmospheric testing of nuclear bombs, which was spreading radioactivity around the world and was showing up in mother's milk. It was showing up in cow's milk. It was showing up in babies' teeth. So that stopped the atmospheric testing mostly, though the underground testing continued. And then it was really Richard Nixon with Henry Kissinger who forged the first limits on nuclear weapons back in 1972, the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, they were called, SALT. And then Ronald Reagan comes along, and he has, with this treaty, the one we're talking about, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, referring to missiles that fly in between very short ranges that you would use on a battlefield and the ocean-spanning ranges of our intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are medium and intermediate range missiles. And he reached a deal with Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987 to eliminate those. That the United States and the Soviet Union would take some 3,000 weapons they had built, perfectly beautiful, modern, working missiles, and would destroy them. And over the next few years, they destroyed all 3,000 of them and pledged not to build any in their arsenals to avoid this risk of a regional conflict becoming quickly a nuclear conflict, which would then spread to a global war. And that was the first time we actually reduced the weapons rather than just limited them. What was that?
I want to give you two more historical questions. One on the negative, horrifying, and one positive. So I think people are familiar with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Could you give us a couple of examples, and probably include the Cuban Missile Crisis because that's always worth retelling, of how close we've gotten to either an intentional use or accidental use of these weapons? And then, let's just start with that one first.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what George Shultz, former Reagan Secretary of State, and Bill Perry, the former Clinton Secretary of Defense, say, that we got out of the high point of nuclear risk in the Cold War by sheer luck, that we came real close to doing this. The Cuban Missile Crisis, Robert F. Kennedy famously wrote in one of his memoirs that in one of his essays, I should say, that he was on the lawn of the White House during that crisis and thought, this is the last time I'm going to see the sunrise. And we really thought it was going to happen. And so that's the one people remember the most, a decision away from nuclear war. But there's been about a dozen serious close calls as a result of a computer glitch. At one time, a training tape was inadvertently put into the computers at NORAD, our defense system, and we thought we were under attack, and they almost launched it because the big board lit up and they thought we're under attack. This kind of incident was recently portrayed in Madam Secretary, the CBS show. Their last episode of season 4 in May concluded with just such an accidental event. So it's been, we really dodged it, but the truth remains what Kennedy said at the UN in 1961. We're living under a nuclear sword of Damocles hanging by a slender thread, and we could have a nuclear holocaust by accident, miscalculation, or madness. So he said we have to eliminate these weapons before they eliminate us, and that's still the struggle we're faced. We've come way down. Since Reagan started the reduction process, the INF treaty led to the next Reagan treaty that George H.W. Bush got to finalize and sign, the Strategic Arms Reduction Talks, or START, which cut the U.S. and Soviet arsenals in half. Since then, we've climbed down by 85%. We've reduced the number of nuclear weapons in the world. Most of them are held by the United States and Russia, by 85%. So we're down to about just over 14,000 nuclear weapons. The trouble is that reduction process has stopped. There are no talks going on, there are no further reductions going on, and there are leaders in almost all the countries who want to increase the arsenals, including here. John Bolton, our national security advisor, is a big advocate of ramping up nuclear weapons, and he's been against any reductions or control mechanisms for his entire career.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get back to the sort of catastrophe of Bolton in a minute. On the positive side, and I guess you already outlined some of it, but maybe could you also touch on Reykjavik and also in a post-Cold War world? I mean, I know Barack Obama, certainly at least in speeches, outlined his vision of ridding the world of these weapons. What about the closest time, the closest we've gotten, whether it's been through actual policy or even just national articulation of Reagan, Gorbachev, Obama, of people saying we need to get rid of these things as a global project?
Okay. So the closest we came is Reykjavik. And that's where, I was working on the House Armed Services Committee at the time, and I thought Ronald Reagan was the devil. I was working for the Democrats. And he had a big arms buildup in his first administration. In his second administration, he had come face to face with the nuclear threat, and he said, we have to eliminate these things. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a ruse. But no, he really wanted to do it. And when he got a chance to sit down with Mikhail Gorbachev in Reykjavik in 1986, they came inches away from a deal to eliminate all nuclear weapons, all of them. George Shultz was right there with him. He still tells the story. And it got hung up over a dispute over the Star Wars program, the anti-missile program that Reagan had started. Both sides made a mistake. They should have agreed to some restrictions on the program. Reagan didn't want to give it up. Mikhail Gorbachev thought he couldn't make a deal if he came back to his generals with an unrestricted anti-missile program. So the deal fell apart. But Reagan and Gorbachev kept up their partnership, and that's what led to the INF Treaty in 1987, and that's what led to the New START Treaty. So they didn't get all the way, but they started the reduction process. The second closest we've come is Barack Obama, who really came in, and I helped work on his campaign and helped work on the nuclear policy platforms. He really came in with the goal to institutionalize what Reagan had envisioned and thought he could do it and make a big start of it. And he did. His first couple of years were good. He had a new treaty, further reductions. He started a number of very positive initiatives, but he was met with the 3 R's. The Russians refused to cooperate. The Republicans attacked him ruthlessly. He made a big fight over simple treaties like the one he had on the New START Treaty. And then finally he faced the resistance of the nuclear bureaucracy. And for them, it's all about contracts and jobs and keeping these programs alive. And his program petered out. But now, this is the exciting part. And here's the good news. We're going to have another shot at this. with the elections that have just happened, you're bringing into power Democrats like Representative Adam Smith, who will be most likely the new chair of the House Armed Services Committee, who think we're spending too much on nuclear weapons, who want to kill some of the more dangerous new programs that Trump is starting, like programs that would build new, more usable nuclear weapons for battlefield use, who thinks we have to change the policy of the United States, this is Adam Smith, so that the president can't just push the button and launch a war solely on his own decision. He wants to change the policy so that we have what's called a no first use. The U.S. will not use nuclear weapons first. And with that, you now get at least a couple of years where you can have these debates in the Congress, maybe enact some legislation, but really be the testing ground for the next set of nuclear policies that hopefully you can debate in the 2020 campaign and perhaps have a new president come in 2021 with a better plan than Obama had that accounts for the resistance you're likely to face, that can get us back to reductions and move us back on the path to elimination. And with that, this is the final thing I'll say, then I'll shut up. There is an international movement that has arisen against nuclear weapons, not as big as what we saw in the 80s when you had millions of people in the streets, but very significant. In fact, I was in Oslo, Norway last December to see the Nobel Peace Prize awarded to this group, International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, who won the prize for their global campaign to get a new treaty that the UN has passed on banning nuclear weapons. First time in the nuclear age that we have a treaty banning them, saying they should be illegal. And this is picking up steam. They're hoping to have this treaty enter into force. They need 50 nations to ratify it. They hope that in 2019, no later than 2020, the treaty will actually enter into force. None of the states with nuclear weapons have signed it, but that's the struggle. See if you can pressure them into taking meaningful steps to reduce and ultimately ban these weapons.
So let's get to, some of the nitty gritty of this. And I don't want to. I mean, the prime focus will be Trump and Russia, but I do want to touch on both. We'll get to North Korea and Iran, and then also some of the more, less prominent players that we talk about. The other states with this capacity: China, United Kingdom, and Pakistan, India, and France, and Israel, but. What is Trump's complaint about the intermediate missile treaty is that Russia has been violating it. And I have to admit that I'm very used to, just basically disregarding what Trump says about things. But I've been reading that actually this isn't entirely not true. That right. Russia actually has been stepping outside the bounds of this treaty. And also, as you suggested earlier, that Russia was not as receptive as they might have been to President Obama's push to rid the world of these weapons and reduce arsenals, which is really in contrast to Putin's public branding. If you watch interviews with him, one of his complaints about the United States that I've seen is actually a lack of commitment to things like arms control. So he certainly tried to position that he's sober and serious about these weapons. And maybe he's another person that we should be used to disregarding what he says as well. What's the actual truth of Russia and their relation to this treaty? And then, is that a viable play of, they're stepping out of it, so we'll just scrap the thing? Yeah.
So let me just let's unravel this. So the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, John Bolton has announced that they want to pull out of this. And Trump then made that statement at one of his political rallies a few weeks ago. We only have two remaining nuclear arms treaties with the Russians. One is the INF, and the other is the START Treaty. The START Treaty expires in 2021. And Bolton wants to kill that. So this is what's at stake. If you let the INF treaty, he stabbed in the back. The new START treaty, he wants to kill in its sleep, just not do anything and let it expire peacefully. You do that, then there's no more restraints, there's no more limits, there's no more inspections. One of the things that treaties give you is the ability to put your inspectors into their weapons sites so you can see what they're doing. That's why the military supports these kinds of agreements. It gives them transparency, it gives them predictability, it lets them plan more accurately. So there's general military support for these arms control agreements. Historically, it's been that way. It's been the ideologues who haven't liked them, not really the military. So will Putin go along with this? Well, coming up very soon, November 11th, Putin and Trump are going to meet in Paris, and it's possible that Putin can pitch Trump to extend this treaty, can go over the head of Bolton, get right to the president, and might convince him to extend the treaty. Trump might be willing to do this. You can disagree with Trump on 9 out of 10 things, but every once in a while he is right. And if you can get him to do this, that would be a good thing. Are the Russians actually violating the INF? And again, Trump is right. Yes, they are. I was on the International Security Advisory Board for the Secretaries of State Clinton and Kerry, and I saw the intel on this when it was coming in 2014, and it's pretty clear they are violating. It's a relatively small violation. It's not militarily significant. They've taken one of their short-range cruise missiles, one of the ones they launched from the ground, so a ground-launched cruise missile, and they've modified it so that it could have a greater range, a range that falls within the range prohibited by the treaty. So they are violating the treaty, and they deployed this at a test site in Russia and one other site, but in the Russian part of Europe, and it's just banned. You can't do it. You can't have a missile like this. Does it matter? Not really. The Russians have lots of other ways they can hit European targets, and we have lots of other ways that we can hit those targets with nuclear weapons. But it is technically a violation. Does Putin want to give up his nuclear weapons? No, I don't think he does. This is one of the last vestiges of superpower status that he has. So at this point, we're talking about getting these two autocratic leaders, somewhat irresponsible leaders, certainly undemocratic leaders, to just agree to the limits. Let's preserve the limitation and inspection regime so that we might have a shot at going back to reductions when we have more reasonable leaders in both countries.
So when we talk about a figure like John Bolton and this sort of broader neoconservative and far-right opposition to these treaties, I mean, there's two components of it. They're both disturbing, but I think, and connected, but they are somewhat distinct. So one, I guess I understand just from that perspective ideologically, is just an opposition to any agreement to a restraint on U.S. force, period, as a principle of
exactly
U.S.
right.
Okay, go ahead.
No, that's exactly. You continue this. The idea is that, we're the good guys, and we have hegemony over the world. We're the superpower. Who would you want to be the superpower? China? France? We're the good guys, so we should have a certain amount of American exceptionalism. The rules shouldn't apply to us. We should be able to have the freedom to exercise our military force wherever we want, because we will only do that for good. And what we want is restraints on other people. And the liberals think that you get those restraints by mutual restraints, by treaties that mutually restrict both sides' military force, and the neoconservatives or the conservatives say, no, you only get those kinds of restrictions by force, by military dominance. And it has that view is particularly virulent and particularly sort of nationalistic right now in this administration. It really is, America über alles. It's really above all. We set the rules, and if you don't go along with us, we will crush you, one way or the other. You see that in the way they're treating Iran. You see that in the way they're trying to approach North Korea. You see it in their view of all international mechanisms, starting with the United Nations.
Definitely, and I want to touch on Iran and North Korea in a second. But the other thing that is incredibly disturbing, and obviously I reject every single piece of that view ideologically, but the other part that you read about and hear about is also the notion of developing, as you said earlier, battlefield deployable or smaller, nuclear weapons. How does that fit into it? And is this actually a legitimate thought process amongst these people, that these things can be deployed in a more narrow way? Is this something they're really working on and want?
Yes, it is. And it comes directly from this view. that, look, we have this military weapon. Why are we self-deterred from using it? Why do we hesitate to use nuclear weapons? And part of the reasoning is, according to this view, is that they're too big. We now have bombs. Our basic bomb is approximately 10 times to 30 times the size of the Hiroshima bomb. So we no longer have atomic bombs. That's Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We have hydrogen bombs that basically duplicate the basic energy force in the universe, what powers the sun, fusion of atoms, not splitting of atoms. And those bombs, are city destroyers. And so therefore the logic goes, we need to make smaller bombs with back to Hiroshima size or smaller so that we can use them on the battlefield and we can have an advantage. And we can control the escalation. So if you go to the recent issue of Foreign Affairs, for example, one of the preeminent American journals, you will see a discussion of nuclear weapons, and it's led off by an article that says we shouldn't be afraid of nuclear weapons anymore. And it's presented as new thinking by some of the new breed of young Dr. Strangeloves that have emerged in this town.
Right.
No, really, they are out there, and that them, and that's what they think.
Yeah.
Elbridge Colby at the Center for New American Security, or Keir Lever at Georgetown University. They're out there, and what they're doing is recycling theories from the 1950s. This is what military leaders thought and conservatives thought in the 1950s. Nuclear weapons are the weapons of the future. We need them for every mission. So we built not just nuclear missiles, not just nuclear bombs, but nuclear torpedoes, nuclear depth charges, nuclear landmines. My favorite weapon was a nuclear bazooka. We called it the Davy Crockett. Jesus. It fired a very small nuclear warhead about a half a mile. Now, why anyone would want to fire a nuclear weapon half a mile is beyond me. And even the Army figured that out. We stopped making them in the 1960s. But we went nuclear nuts in the 50s, and we don't have those weapons anymore. We got rid of them, and the Russians got rid of them. And, now you have a new class of these, as I say, young Dr. Strangeloves who want to bring them back and want to put them on ships and want to put them ground-launched cruise missiles, want new artillery pieces again. We used to have nuclear artillery. And they're presenting this as just part of the new great power struggle, and this is a weapon we should have. It was insane in the 50s. It's insane now.
I have to say, just the brief editorial here, the parallels across every single part of public discourse of ideas, right-wing ideas from the 50s and 60s getting recycled as fresh thinking now it's amazing. It's everything from gender relationships to nukes.
Yes.
It's kind of extraordinary.
To the John Birch Society. To American Nazis.
Right.
These kinds of ideas that America flirted with and rejected. Well, they never went away.
Right.
And now they're back. And they're all being supported by this, well, I guess to be honest, this kind of white nationalist view that cuts across all the issues areas, and this is how it's being expressed in the nuclear realm. It is not apart from the white nationalism. It is grounded in that worldview. Now, I'm not saying that the people who are proposing this would identify themselves as white nationalists. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying this is the same thinking. This is its ideological root. They have a shared worldview, and they have a shared aim, which is U.S., and what they generally mean by that is white U.S. global domination.
Well, we could paraphrase Andrew Gillum's, right? I'm not saying you do, but they think you are, right?
Oh, right.
I think
all right, I'm not saying you're a racist, but they think you're a racist.
There you go. Yeah,
well,
same thing works.
Right. I haven't heard this this is the first time I think I've discussed it like this, and the first time I haven't heard anybody else discussing like this. But I believe that this is true. I believe that's what's happening, and I don't believe you would be seeing these ideas giving this much prominence were it not for Donald Trump and Trumpism and the nationalist impulse it's riding.
Definitely. So let's touch then. I want to touch on North Korea and Iran. And, my read is there is this very unconventional, bizarre dynamic between Trump and the North Korean leader, which is, it's very funny to me in some ways. It's which I guess in my sort of cynical state, it's very entertaining. It's also very bizarre and very disturbing. And I will say, let's just take North Korea first. I see the dangers of it. I didn't like the sort of liberal opposition to them talking, though, frankly. I mean, I think it's absolutely better they're in communication than not communication. But right. I'm aware that obviously, Trump is perfectly happy to go somewhere and sign a vision board without any kind of substance. So, where are we at with North Korea?
Yeah.
And do you think it's better that they talk than not talk, just as sort of a general principle?
Yeah, so let's take this in three slices. What's going on? What are the risks of what's going on? And if you're an observer or a progressive observer, what should you be thinking about it? And number one is, again, you have to give Donald Trump credit. After a first year where it was all fire and fury and Rocket Man, and we came real close to going to war with North Korea, and we certainly gave that impression. Remember a year and a half ago when Trump said he had an armada heading towards the Korean Peninsula? It turned out he didn't, but he thought he did, and he made us think he did. We were real close, and we were in that kind of situation where a mistake could have triggered a war. We've backed off from that. And since the beginning of the year, both because the dictator in charge of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and Donald Trump have ratcheted back and have shifted gears. And I think almost inadvertently, whether he's following his impulse or it's the way he sees the world, Trump may have stumbled onto a formula that can actually solve this North Korean problem. He flipped the script. Traditionally, the idea was you'd negotiate this complicated nuclear agreement, they'd all agree on it, and then we'd have a general peace treaty, and then you'd have a meeting between the two leaders. That was the prize at the end of the process. Well, he front-loaded it. And by giving Kim Jong-un the sort of security pledges, the sort of peace pledges, and the prestige of having a meeting with the president, he may have created the conditions that will actually allow North Korea to ratchet back their program. They've currently frozen much of it, but not all of it, and they've indicated that they're willing to do more. They're willing to take more steps. That's what's going on, and now it's in the balance. Can this process proceed or not? And North Korea is threatening to restart its program. They've suspended missile tests. They've blown up a test site. They say they're not going to test nuclear weapons anymore. They're still producing nuclear material, which is the next step. Can you get them to stop doing that and then roll it back? The problem you have may be the incompetence of this administration. It may be that they don't have the talented personnel to actually do it. God knows they haven't staffed the State Department. We're still missing key experts, key ambassadors. The Undersecretary for Asian Affairs, for example, is still not in place. There is none. No nomination.
There's no one from Duck Dynasty available?
That's right. Do we have any more friends?
Yeah, what's
Is he
going
going to
on?
appoint anybody from the World Federation of Wrestlers?
Right. I thought plenty of people were at Mar-a-Lago visiting. I don't understand why this is so hard to fill. Yeah.
Well, they're still not there, and that comes from from a megalomaniac view that you're the only important one, and the rest of these people are just getting in the way.
Right.
Can you do? And then you have the ideology of Bolton and Trump, who basically don't want to do this. Especially Bolton. He's made a career of regime change. That the way you solve the problem is not to change the regime's behavior, but to change the regime. So he still wants to go with that, and they could sabotage the president's plans. That's actually what's happening right now. Right today, the day we're talking, the North Koreans have canceled a meeting of their foreign minister with the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo because they believe that Pompeo is not going to give them the goods. And that what they want is for Kim to meet again directly with Trump and have a personal exchange. And you know what?
Not a bad idea.
That's probably right.
Right.
They're probably right. So if Trump can just, at the moment, and I won't go into too much more detail than this, what the North Koreans want is a piece of paper. They want a pledge that the president declares the end of the Korean War, that which never ended. We just have a truce. It didn't formally end, and says we are at peace. And if you do that, they say they will start dismantling their facility that makes the stuff for the bombs. They will start dismantling their plutonium production facility. If you can trade paper for plutonium, I say you take that deal. It's not everything they have, and they still have other facilities enriching uranium, but it's a big start. It is a significant step. And if Trump and Kim can agree on that, that's a positive. So what should you think about this if you're a progressive? You should be supporting this process. You should be putting aside your criticisms of Trump on other areas. You should be worried about the competence of the administration of doing this. You should be worried about whether Trump himself is capable of doing this. But you should support the diplomacy and hope it works. Because if it fails, well, the danger is then you're back to the threats and the recriminations and the jilted lovers. And anybody in a relationship like that knows it can get real ugly real quick.
Yeah. I mean, and also I would say I agree with that entirely. And I would just say, and also maybe, if you can, comb around, look for somebody who might have recently been released from like Florida jail for like a health supplement scam or something like that, who maybe, said something favorable about Trump, and we could staff up that Asian affairs portfolio you were talking about. But any mail fraud people,
anybody
yeah,
Mueller?
Yeah, anybody involved in, I would say, wire fraud and thinks Trump is great could probably do that, and visited the Philippines once, would be a solid candidate for that portfolio.
And here's the one positive note on this.
Yeah.
Right now, the process is largely being driven by the Koreans themselves, both Kim Jong-un and by South Korean President Moon Jae-in.
Who's done very well in my read, yeah.
Who's kind of what?
Who's done very well in my read, yeah.
He has. He's driven the whole process. The Olympic truce was his idea. Getting the North Koreans to sit in the same booth as the Americans, Vice President Pence, you remember those famous photos. That was his idea. And they are moving, and they are de-escalating some of the conventional military conflict. In fact, he expressly says, we're going to take care of the conventional part. You guys take care of the nuclear part. So they now have regular hotlines, regular meetings. They've established a liaison office in the demilitarized zone where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, North Koreans and South Korean military officers now talk to each other. They are demining a part of the demilitarized zone. They're actually starting to demilitarize the demilitarized zone. They're removing guard posts. They're banning military exercises within a 5-mile radius, so there's no mistakes that trigger a larger conflict. So the Koreans are moving ahead. They want the Americans to play a supporting role, and if Trump listens to Moon, I think we'll be okay.
Then so there's some grounds for optimism there. Iran, let's touch on Iran. I think Iran was, in my view, it's definitely one of the greatest accomplishments of the Obama administration. The deal, maybe you could reiterate, my read was undoubtedly working. Everybody was complying. And the rest of the world seems to want it, besides the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. So where are we?
Yeah. The Europeans considered this the crowning achievement of European diplomacy. Remember, they'd been negotiating with the Iranians since 2003. And finally, they had a president, Obama, who was able to do it, and the political conditions allowed him to do it. So we joined these talks in 2013, and almost right away, we got a freeze on the program. A couple of months, bang, boom, done. And then we took another period of time, a little over a year, to get a final agreement that slashed the Iranian nuclear program to a fraction of its size, froze it for a good 15 years, and then put it under a strict inspection regime, under lock and seal. And these aren't, Game of Thrones wax seals on parchment. These are real-time radio frequency fiber optic seals. You go into this room, you open this cask, we're going to know immediately that you're violating the agreement. And because of all these arrangements and the 100+ pages of detail into this agreement, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, has certified, no, Iran is in compliance, and they've done that 12 times so far. Our own intelligence services, no, Iran is in compliance. They are not cheating. They are not building a bomb. They don't have any secret smuggling operations. No, this is locked down. We got a good 12 more years to go on this. And it's this deal that Trump decides is no good, that he wants to rip it up. So you don't actually rip it up. There's no withdrawal agreement. You violate it. He just stopped complying with it. And this month he imposed new sanctions, unilateral sanctions, saying that any country that does business with Iran, that, for example, buys Iranian oil, will be subject to sanctions. So we don't actually sanction Iran. We don't do business with Iran. We sanction our friends and others who do business with Iran. So the Europeans, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Indians, the Chinese. Well, you can imagine how the rest of the world sees this. Here's the United States, who pulls out of this multinational agreement, an agreement endorsed, sanctioned by the United Nations Security Council. Every other country in the world likes this agreement, with the exception of Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. Everybody else likes it, urges the president to stay in it. We pull out of it, and then we start imposing our own laws on them. So we are violating their right to set their own security priorities, their own security arrangements, by saying, no, we're going to decide for you. You, Europe, you can't trade with Iran. Bang, we're going to do that. Well, of course, this is the ultimate expression of American unilateralism. This is the ultimate expression of Trumpism. This is the Bolton ideal. We will force the world to do what we want. I would say that this approach has a near zero chance of working. The Washington Post, just today, the day we're talking, has editorialized on this. The Post is generally conservative on Iran, but they say, look, this embargo is going to be much less effective than what we put in the Obama administration, when you had the whole world agreeing we shouldn't trade with Iran. What makes you think this is going to work? And the danger of it not working is that the pressure and the attempted isolation of Iran includes military pressure, and that increases the risk that there could be some incident, for example, involving U.S. forces in Syria, some 2,000, that might come in conflict with Iranian forces in Syria, some 10,000 Revolutionary Guard. And that spark, bang, that could lead to the bigger war that some actually want.
Right.
In Northeast Asia, none of our allies want to go to war with North Korea. Nobody thinks that's a good idea. In the Middle East, Saudi Arabia does think it's a good idea. The United Arab Emirates does think it's a good idea. Benjamin Netanyahu, not his military establishment, but Benjamin Netanyahu himself, thinks it's a good idea. We should push Iran back in the box. And military force is the way to do that. Economic isolation is just the beginning of the process. And so that's why the situation with Iran, with the flashpoints in Syria, the possible flashpoints in Yemen, is probably the most dangerous crisis we face right now. It's underreported. We're starting to get more discussion because of the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Because of that, people are now reevaluating our support of the Saudi regime, reevaluating our support for the Saudis in Yemen, reevaluating our involvement in Yemen, and re-looking at the Iran-Saudi balance and say, wait a minute. We don't want to get drawn into this. Why are we doing this again? Whose interest is this in? Is Saudi Arabia really much different than Iran? Is Iran really the source of world conflict in the region?
I would say objectively worse, right? I mean, not in any way to excuse the many, many failings and abuses of the Iranian leadership, but the notion,
exactly.
I mean, objectively worse with regards to democratic process and human rights, and I just don't even see how that's debatable.
I think we could settle on similar.
Yeah.
They both have throw political prisoners in jail.
Right.
Both have summary executions. Both oppress women. Both have supported groups that others see as terrorists. In the case of Iran, it's Hezbollah and Hamas. In the case of Saudi Arabia, for 40 years they've been pushing a virulent form of Islam that gave rise to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And now they are engaged they are causing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. The Saudi bombing of Yemen has killed or wounded tens of thousands of innocent Yemeni and has put 15 million people at risk of starvation and has led to the outbreak of cholera that's the worst since World War II. All this is not an accident. It's not caused by climate change. It's caused by Mohammed bin Salman's decision that he was going to reassert Saudi military might, and the way he was going to do that was intervening in the Yemen civil war. So yeah, it's real hard to look at that situation and believe Mike Pompeo when he comes out and announcing the embargoes and the sanctions that we're putting on Iran, the people doing business with Iran, and says that they are the world sponsor of terrorism and they're the source of instability and in the Middle East, and it's their malign behavior. It's really hard to make that case anymore. And so we have this is the ray of hope I'll leave you and your listeners with, is that we have a chance with the new Congress to push for a rebalancing of American interests in the Gulf, specifically by cutting off sales of U.S. weapons to the Saudis to stop them from bombing Yemen, to declare to pass what some are now proposing an authorization for the use of military force in the region that would pull back U.S. forces from involvement in Yemen. All this is going to be right up at the front of the agenda of the lame duck in Congress. You might see this in December come up before the Congress, and if it doesn't happen then, almost certainly in the first few months of the new Congress.
Well, Joseph Cirincione, I hope actually I can host you again sometime soon, because I also want to talk about China and India and Pakistan. There's a whole world to lay to waste here, or not, hopefully. But this was excellent. I think this was the tour from Trump and Russia, taking us all the way through the U.S.-UK-enabled atrocities in Yemen and everywhere else. So we did a lot of work today, and I hope we can do some more work in the near future.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. I'm sorry if my answers were too long. I am a
not
professor.
At all. No, that was terrific. That was exactly what we dare to be boring here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you so much. All right, folks. And actually, I have to admit, maybe I'm just sort of really nerding here, but I didn't find any of that remotely not interesting.
No, that was great.
Fascinating.
Have we had him on before?
I feel like, I don't know in this iteration, but it would be shocking if he was never on.
I feel like I've written that into a Chiron before, but that was great.
Yeah, Joseph Cirincione's brilliant. All right, folks, we got to go to the fun half. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Subscribe to this show on YouTube and iTunes. Write a review, justcoffee.coop. Check out the News Voice copy on today's show. Tickets are moving fast, so get your tickets to the first Michael Brooks show at the Bell House, February 1st in Gowanus. Matt's going to be there. I'm going to be there. David Griscom is going to be there. There's going to be an Obama impersonation contest. There's going to be a lot of shenanigans. And we were having special guests, of course, Bosch Garsoon-Carr, Luna Minkowski, and Trevor Beaulieu of Champagne Sharks. Buy your tickets. Can't wait to see you there. Become a patron of the Michael Brooks Show, patreon.com/TMBS. Stay tuned this weekend. We're going to unlock a large sort of strategic historical overview of the midterms and what to learn from them with the great Bill Fletcher Jr., who everybody should be watching and reading. Matt, literary hangover.
Yeah, we're going to be recording tonight, actually. Hope Leslie, Early Times in the Massachusetts, a 1827 novel by Catherine Maria Sedgwick. An early chapter sort of brings up something that I thought has a certain relevance, especially this time of the year, in cultural appropriation. For instance, when a lot of the Pequot women and children were put into bondage in Massachusetts after the Mystic Massacre of the Pequot Indians, they were forced to wear, Puritan-style clothing or English-style clothing, and that was a sign of, it was a sign to, especially the men, Native Americans that were allowed to stay, the Pequot Indians, they couldn't call themselves that after that, by law of the treaty that was signed. It just goes to show that, some people get a bit, impatient with discussions about cultural appropriation, but that stuff is, and that symbology is, that goes back at least hundreds of years, if not longer than that. And there's something
But historicizing it gives it depth, so it isn't just like a, hey, here's a listicle.
Right, it's important to understand.
It gives us the real context of why.
And what it's actually been used to, like, what power it's used to, serve, basically.
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, the IMs are on. We're about to call into the phones, and I feel like I'm forgetting something, but what's up?
Patreon.com/The Antifada as well.
Okay, yes. Check out The Antifada as well. Check out The Antifada as well. Yeah, forget it. There's some other thing, but whatever. We got to keep going. We will see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boys back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Dannerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck them. Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of back. 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 Hell of a lot of back.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on! Fuck them. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday! Happy birthday to me, Jew boy!
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on! Come on! Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total
pussy.
Total pussy. Welcome to the fun half. Are the phones up, Matt? All right, let's take a call. You're calling from an 847 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael, it's Josh from Chicago.
Josh from Chicago. How you doing?
I'm sitting in an airport about to go to the land of free healthcare known as Canada.
Cool.
So
that sounds nice.
I'm doing good.
What's on your mind, Josh?
Well, first of all, when I saw Bill Clinton the other day, I did want to go up to him and ask him if he was voting for Howie Hawkins in the election or if he was Cynthia or bust.
Got to do working families.
We should vote working families down ballot and then Howie Hawkins to register that even though Andrew Cuomo has a lock grip on the state, that we still support a progressive agenda.
Oh, man. Anyways, that was good. Anyways, two things I want to point out. First of all, I think it's important when we talk about Georgia that we say that this election result is essentially the same as what happened in Russia or what happens in Turkey. It's completely illegitimate. It's not a real election.
I agree.
I think we need to talk about that. And also just in terms of this idea that in regards to Florida, was completely an act of racism, I think, in terms of Gillum not winning. And I don't buy the excuse people who vote with their wallet. I think if you vote with your wallet, that's an act of racism and white supremacy. That's just my opinion.
I think that there is, and I'm almost getting exhausted of having to say this, but apparently we're going to have to say this a lot more. And I just recorded a conversation that will come out this weekend for TMBS, which I really, just in general, I wish more people would have on Bill Fletcher Jr. I mean, he's a really brilliant and important figure who's been involved in almost every major kind of leftward effort since the 80s, and is also, a scholar of labor movements and other really important areas. And there is no contradiction between addressing and understanding that things like racial justice as expressed through actually having American democracy, as well as having a serious labor single-payer program, there's no contradiction there whatsoever. And I think, Adolph Reed, his critique of neoliberal representation politics, I agree with 100% because I'm a socialist and I believe in universal programs and I believe in serious structural justice. I don't want to just have, broader representation in a totally unequal society. That said, as I always say, if the choices are white supremacy capitalism or multicultural capitalism,
multiracial,
of course. But
exactly.
But the other important points to make are and just briefly, like people in 2016, they used this pseudo woke politics and got caught up in all of this nonsense to try to undermine really good policy, like free college, like breaking up banks, like single-payer healthcare, all of which.
I agree with that.
There's no doubt about that. But the point is, right now, if your response to the Andrew Gillum loss is he campaigned with Hillary Clinton or he didn't talk about single-payer, not only is that delusional, and wrong, that is doing the work of the original Hillary Clinton campaign bullshit. You're toxifying our brand.
On single payer.
And you know what? He pivoted to Medicaid expansion. Doesn't matter. That's not why he lost that race.
Still good.
It's not why he lost that race. Period.
Can I
Yes.
I also want to make a point about the Senate.
Sure.
Oh God, I'm about to lose Jamie as a friend when I say this.
Oh God. It's okay. Don't worry about it.
Oh God. Okay, I voted for Claire McCaskill largely. Oh, I just heard the silence.
What did you say about Claire McCaskill?
Yeah, I did. Largely because I'm a former Missouri resident.
Okay.
And I know the guy is worse, who's campaigning against her. And I hate Claire McCaskill. I think she's terrible.
Sounds fear-based.
I also think she's better than this white supremacist who's now. He is. This guy Hawley is literally. He is a pretty. Oh God, he's just terrible. This guy is just terrible. But I mean, and the thing
so I'd say vote third party, no matter what, no matter where you are. I don't care if you're in a swing state.
Read some Maoist 4chan and chill out.
What bothered me was that she basically, and this was the same thing as Joe Donnelly, and fuck these people, fuck Joe Donnelly, fuck Claire McCaskill, is that they basically just, instead of actually talking about things like healthcare expansion, talking about things that make sense for people that could actually win them votes, they used racist rhetoric, things like the migrant caravan ban or the birthright citizenship thing, and that was never going to win them. They were never going to win with those voters. And I think the thing that we learned from the Senate races is that centrism or right-wing Democrats, these people are killing the party. Those are two winnable seats, I think, and both these incompetent campaigns lost that for them, and it's a damn shame because their replacements are going to do so much worse and so much damage, and it's really just a shame. But if anything, I think it finishes off centrism or right. I don't even want to call McCaskill a centrist. She's a right-wing Democrat. And same with Donnelly. But, that was something that I just was really horrified by, especially as someone who's sort of involved in that campaign.
Thanks for the call, Josh. Enjoy Canada, and remember the good results, too. Thanks, man. Speaking of discrediting centrism, I would like to talk about my favorite or least favorite trust fund baby. Meghan McCain is maybe the most useless person on planet Earth. She is not intelligent. She has limited broadcast talent. She is purely the product of American nepotism. And she is sort of the millennial version at times of this thing that a certain type of centrist or a certain type of liberal gets fixated on, which is, of course, the reasonable Republican or the good Republican and all of this fantasy nonsense. And what has been proven over and over again are basically there's three versions of this scenario. One is you're Mitt Romney and you give a great speech about how Trump will lead to trickle-down racism and it's so horrible and blah, blah, blah. And then a couple months later, you're there getting cucked at a midtown eatery or nice restaurant because you're trying to get Secretary of State, or you're Jeff Flake and none of your moral hand-wringing has anything to do with voting to stop Brett Kavanaugh from getting on the Supreme Court, as an example.
Jeff, don't ask me or what Flake.
Exactly. Or, the second step is you've built a whole career. If you're Rick Wilson or David Frum, and there's this never-ending appetite, apparently, amongst a certain part of the kind of like bougie, centrist, relatively politically illiterate readership for you to castigate Trump for being a jerk while essentially you share a lot of the same policies as him. And you helped get us to the predicament and the crisis we're in. Or you just were involved in electing any number of ghouls and zombies and gangsters to public office. Or you were a prime advocate of a global war and torture regime. Or the third option, which almost never, ever happens, but you become like a guy, Kevin Phillips, who is, I don't even know if he's still alive, but he was a Nixon advisor and still a very questionable figure in a lot of ways. But by the time you got to the Bush era, he was writing books on why the Republican Party was essentially just purely enthralled to Wall Street and big business, and also the Democrats. And he had a kind of broader populist critique, which is to say he wasn't a Republican anymore. Okay, so there's three scenarios here. There's irrelevant hand-wringing nonsense. There's the I don't like Trump because he's uncouth, but I support laying waste to the world and stealing people's money, and I'm generally useless. And the only people that I have any sway over are mediocre centrists and liberals, because no actual conservative would ever listen to a David Frum, as an example. And then there's the third option, which is that you're actually like, wait a second, I'm not an asshole anymore, and I'm out of here. And even that former Bush lawyer who ran for Senate in Minnesota, I wouldn't have voted for him, but okay, I'll give him credit. He was like, I'm a Democrat. And by the way, we need to protect the environment. Now I support Medicare for all. Fair enough. Meghan McCain, a lot of people have tried to slot in that second category. And she had that embarrassing moment that made the rounds during her dad's funeral where she was like, okay, it was like already great. Like, okay. And it was uncomfortable and weird to watch, but of course it made the rounds of people who tweet and gram that sort of lame-ass thing. And here is Meghan McCain with the best contribution she's ever made to public life, being really clear about where her primary allegiances lie on The View.
The serious lesson for Democrats also is that Republicans are not going to vote against their own agenda and against their own interests, meaning I think there's an impression sometimes, if you don't watch Fox News, that all Republicans, if you're against Trump or you have issues with his rhetoric, that automatically I have somehow morphed into a liberal, that every ideology and principle I've ever agreed on, that the principles that make me who I am, the conservative that I am, have flown out the window. And all of a sudden, I'm a Democrat. That is not the case. Republicans are going to vote for their own agenda, and they did a lot last night, especially in Senate and gubernatorial races. And I think the Democrats that were really competitive were the ones that were more moderate. So that is a lesson I would take away.
That was disappointing to me, actually, because when you look at the Republicans...
Of course it's disappointing. You're a Democrat. Well, it's not disappointing for me. I'm a Republican. I'm going to end up voting for the Republicans. And there's a way to differentiate Trump from candidates.
It was disappointing.
No, actually, in substance, there isn't. And I think, obviously, Megan's not intelligent enough to realize that, but she actually just articulated that precisely herself. And what is her agenda? She's literally a trust fund baby who's been handed wealth and a career from inception. And she is going to vote to give herself more of that and protect what was already given to her. And she lives in New York, and her dad probably occasionally was like, it was a bad call to vote against making MLK Jr. Day a holiday, and I should have when I had a chance when I was running for president in South Carolina in 2000. I shouldn't have cucked out. I should have said, obviously, the Confederate flag is a symbol of racism. And incidentally, even though I still vote against marriage equality and so on, we've got some gay friends around because we're essentially multi-millionaire entertainment family. But when it actually comes down to things, well, Daddy was about endless wars, invading the planet, and, killing plenty of people in the Middle East and saber rattling in Eastern Europe and deterring China. And daughter is into getting money given to her so that she can have even more luck in her entirely unearned career. I mean, honestly, you could read Thomas Piketty or you could look at Meghan McCain, and the lesson about intergenerational wealth and how it sclerotifies society is there. I mean, this is somebody, if this was the daughter of a Kmart manager, this is not somebody who's rising to the top of a meritocracy. This is pure mediocrity through contacts. And she's going to vote to give herself shit. And that is the Republican, at least the wealthy part of who votes for Republicans, who actually get policy rewarded. And if she has to look the other way on white nationalism and homophobia and all the other stuff, she will, even as she continues to listen to Lorde and have gay friends or whatever the fuck else it is that people think make this wretched human being moderate.
I wonder if she signed a contract extension recently or something like that, because it's very rare that the Never Trumpers will be like, yeah, I'm not going to work with you guys.
Yeah.
I'm not really your ally. Yeah, this Trump stuff, I'll feign outrage, but fundamentally, I'm not going to change any of my behavior.
Right, that's true. But she's also getting a good job at, the anxiety and the temper tantrum she had about socialism a couple of months ago. She has a certain... There is something very the pores are coming from across town.
Oh, yeah.
She's the smelling salts are out. And I think it's it's different when, Daddy says Hillary will be okay. Right? Now it's oh my God, they're actually voting for people that might mean that I won't inherit 6 houses. This might mean that I might not have just a completely unearned decadent lifestyle. And that is a problem. That terrifies me.
And
She said, that terrifies me.
And
these ideas are being normalized.
Whether people like Meghan McCain are conscious of that or not, I think it definitely registers. You can tell the stream is going to dry up, even if you're not really sure that's why you're supporting this. I mean, I think that Meghan McCain knows, but generally when people it's a mystery because why they're voting for Republicans, because they're socially this or that, right? It's the money.
They don't care. That's all that shit is secondary to irrelevant. And I also think the other thing is one way of circling the square between this whole identity versus economics debate, which doesn't offer any short-term electoral lessons because it's a long-term project, is there's no doubt that there are some people, because by the way, I really think if you look at the industrial Midwest, I think that the voters who were in serious economic straits, who were portrayed by Democrats and disgusted by the trade deals and by neoliberal policies and fell for the Trump scam out of desperation. And I think, and you're talking about like tens of thousands. I mean, geographically vitally placed, but very few people overall in the electorate. I think they're already done. Like, I actually think the worry might be if you nominate the wrong person that they'll sit home. But I think that those people are already, the ones that were really that were really taken in by the scam, I think they're already leaving. And it was very few people to begin with that weren't voting for Trump out of white identity politics. But those that weren't, I think, are already starting to tap out. And conversely, there is a group of people that, I mean, they're not as privileged as Meghan McCain, but I think that part of what you see in the alt-right in Charlottesville and you know, Steve Bannon complaining about Asian software engineers in Silicon Valley is a correct perception that because of global competition and because of the stage of capitalism that we're at, unless you are literally like, you know, if you're Meghan McCain, if you are part of massive intergenerational power and wealth, yes, it doesn't matter what talent and capacity you have, you will inherit and be given things for sure. But the same people that in the 1970s or 80s could have gone to, like, you know, a decent state school, graduated, tuition, you know, without being in any debt, and then made a good amount of money and basically just been moved forward as like a middle-class white guy, that is actually gone. And some of these people, disgustingly, are absolutely going to look and say, like, well, how do I restore that? Apartheid. And I think that is part of, you know, they're reading the economic picture correctly in some ways, and they're drawing the disgusting but unfortunately historically consistent conclusion with America, which is not, I need to band together with other people who don't look like me but who I share more actual interests with. They're saying, well, wait a second, well, fuck that. Maybe in the midst of all of this market brutality, we can literally reinstate the traditional privileges that I thought was my birthright. And I think in the long term, you can undermine some of that through addressing capitalism. I do. But I don't think you can in an electoral cycle basis.
Right, because that's sort of where it came from in the first place.
Exactly.
Colonialism and capitalism. But those are 400, 500-year-long processes.
Right. These are precisely. And even if we take a more macro view, it's like, yes, I think that there's no doubt that Jimmy Carter starting to neoliberalize the Democratic Party, you can draw a line between that and the ascent of Donald Trump. No doubt. At the same time, that should influence our 20, 30-year plan. I don't think it has much to do for the next 2 years. And that's why people on our side of it need to get much more about, we need single-payer health care. We need to break up banks. We need to immediately seize oil companies, right? Like, even these really bold, radical, aggressive left policies and common sense ones, free college and so on, because they're the right thing to do. And I do think overall, writ large, they're the smartest electoral strategy for engaging people. But a fetishizing of getting into the white identity base through those issues is a fool's errand in the short term. It might pay dividends along with other efforts in the long term.
Equalizing like material resources will cultivate a more democratic and less racist republic. Like, we're inheriting one where wealth has been seriously concentrated, and that has that affects how people view race as it's been constructed.
Exactly. And that's 100% right. Now let's go to the other extreme, because I also hear people who have taken the absurd conclusion from that and tried to cheapen it following the Hillary Clinton campaign to say that we shouldn't have a mass reclaiming of resources and redistribution of wealth in this country, which would be good for all and necessary for all, and in fact disproportionately benefit African Americans, Native Americans, and women and so on, because they have disproportionately been affected by the crimes of wealth theft in this country, as an example. And also, when you say that, as an example, America can't have a social democracy or solidarity because we're not we're not a homogenous society. Well, you're doing three things. One, there's historical examples for every historical example of, and there's no doubt that a progressive coalition in this country, the thing that has always blown it up is race and racism, white supremacy and division. There's no question about it. But there's also examples like Wilmington, North Carolina in post-Reconstruction, which before a white supremacist business-backed coup was in fact a multiracial, black and white run progressive experiment. There's the Free State of Jones, which people should look up. These are real historical examples. Go back and I would strongly encourage listening to the TMBS Illicit History on this. We're going to do a lot more of that coverage. So there are countervailing historical examples. But, you're also just playing into the arms of both the corporate sector that might occasionally be okay with greater representation, but will never do anything about structural inequities of any kind, and white racists who are totally on board with that. And part of actually some of their strategies moving forward are precisely going to be calling for ethno-states with universal programs. They've already started test driving it. And that's why those talking points have filtered down to the dumbest man on YouTube. Check out Dave Rubin. And I know that this has had to have been fed to him because there's no way he could have formulated this thought process on his own.
The left often will say, oh, look at the Nordic countries. Look at these socialist Nordic countries. And it's like, these countries are pretty much all white. And I know you don't like that. And they have a shared culture and they have a shared history. And that actually isn't what America is. We are the great melting pot. And there's a difference when you have people that all come from one area and all have a shared history and a shared culture. That just is. That has nothing to do with racism.
So that isn't just is, actually. And in fact, we need to also not feed this argument because we need to have solidarity with those fighting to protect the social safety net and against bigotry in Scandinavia. Incidentally, in Scandinavia, to be clear, the political parties that are aligned with protecting those social safety systems are also the ones opposing xenophobia and racism. So don't let that get confused. And there is examples, of course, in the United States of programs and initiatives and cross-racial coalitions that have achieved everything from Medicaid to civil rights to, in today's world, Black Lives Matter, the Bernie Sanders campaign, and all sorts of pushes happening, Occupy Wall Street, pushes happening across the country for vital progress. So it's one thing on our side to skip the reality that what has undermined the radical projects of America is absolutely things like white supremacy and racism, and we need to deal with them, and we need to deal with them as questions of democracy, not just fundamentally as democracy. Don't even worry about the word identity as far as I'm concerned. It's about democracy, and it's about full justice rights for all, period, no bullshit. And that is obviously, this is a Confederate and apartheid country, so it's been contradicted by that. If we don't address that, we're not going to win. Now, conversely, when people trot out those arguments in liberal circles to undermine universal programs and solidarity, you are the handmaidens of the corporate state and the fascists, because the fascists are going to seize on that and say, you know what, you're right. And incidentally, we do actually want a more just society. And incidentally, we do want to capitalize on the youth enthusiasm for Bernie Sanders and the youth disillusionment with inequality in the economy. And we're going to tie it to our toxic, disgusting ideology, which has always been historically the case, and why they also will benefit the corporate sector and the Koch brothers in undermining a true, actual broad front to achieve what we need to in this country.
It's weird how he insists we're a melting pot, but yet we don't have a shared history.
Right.
Like to take black people and white people, for instance, the idea that black and white people in America don't have a shared history isn't about history. It's about how history's been written.
Exactly.
And it's exactly his project to make sure those histories are never reconciled with each other.
That's precisely it. And all of these guys share a fundamental ahistorical view. And it's not the way they frame it in their cheap tactics is it's just like, oh, the left just wants you to review history to feel guilty or hear, different stories of human wrongs. But today we're in our world and stuff doesn't matter. It's no. That's the way people are illiterate and clueless to understanding where we are now. You study history to understand the currents that shape our world and where we are today, not to just sort of list previous wrongs, which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. And it shows the sort of moral sickness that they're riding on. But they focus on discounting the moral case, which they're wrong about. And we can respond to that, but we can also be confident in saying, you guys are literally working in a concerted effort to make sure that we don't understand the world, which is in fact anti-scientific, anti-rational, anti-empirical, and anti-intellectual.
Like you can say, like, let's say domestic white servants that helped build America early on too, they were pushed out because of the enclosing of the commons, right?
Right.
Like, all these things
Absolutely.
are integrated and can be reconciled. But when you start from the approach that we do not have shared cultures here, that's because you're racist, Dave Rubin.
Precisely. We have plenty of shared culture in this country. Exactly. I mean, that's the presupposition is right. Like, we're all the same and we never had any conflicts, and that's shared culture. It's like, okay.
And Thanksgiving.
Right. Yeah. And Thanksgiving. That was another great part of our shared culture. Again, I mean, look, I don't know how to do this because on one hand, I mean, obviously I think Dave Rubin is probably never going to debate Samurai, but I will say, no, Dave Rubin's a fucking idiot. I can't even joke. Yeah, he's stupid. And he's also a coward.
He knows where his bread's buttered too.
Yes. He knows where his face is bleached. Tommy YD, damn, Michael, I wish you were on The View to explain where Meghan McCain is coming from to their audience and perhaps even watch the other hosts nod in agreement. I think that is possible. Dr. Chaos MD, anyone who claims to be a Republican because the GOP stands for fiscal conservatism, family values, or small government is either woefully ignorant or willfully disingenuous. If a person does hold those values, they should have left the Republican Party a long time ago because the GOP ditched those values during and after Nixon. We need to ramp up the estate tax so that people like Meghan McCain don't continue to be inherited aristocracy. I'm pretty sure we fought a 200 plus years war, a war 200 years ago to get out from under that shitty system. Well, this is what Richard Wolff actually says when he makes the case for Marxism, is he says the French and American revolutions were supposed to liberate us from these forms, and they're replicated in capitalism. Cuckleberry Finn, yes, plowshares. I'm all about sharing plows. Biscuit Bow. Exactly. Jordan Peterson's on Question Time tonight, the BBC's top political show. Sad to see the BBC give a platform to this quack who's no relevance to British politics. Can't wait to hear about the EU represents the dragons of chaos. I'm still of the school. The platforming to me is not the issue. It's the lack. Look, if the
GQ lady did pretty good job.
That's my thing. Is if you get Adam right, then cool. I mean, there's certain people, like we were playing a clip earlier. Matt was telling me a clip earlier about some, exceptionally dumb YouTube personality. And it's like, we did a parody of his name for the other parody show we did because I thought of it and it was really juvenile and funny and stupid.
Easy to produce.
And easy to produce. And so he became part of a composite character and we knew people would laugh. But like, yeah, we choose. It's like, no, we're not going to play a video of that guy because, I mean, come on. It's fucking irrelevant.
There's a funny one on Progressive Voices.
Yeah, so check out Progressive Voices, TMZ of progressive left politics. But, and our buddy Sahil over there. But, or I shouldn't say he's not our buddy because I guess people will say, like, it's a fucking conspiracy. It's fucking.
I didn't know who it was before this.
Well, at any rate.
But he did a funny video of
AA Seaman.
Who apparently was incredulous that the Democrats were going to take back the House.
Oh, really?
Until like very late in the night.
Oh, AA Seaman.
That's where you want to spend 4 hours on election day. I mean, that's actually very sad when you.
It's sad. The point being is we're not going to play that clip because it's irrelevant. But when you get to I'm writing a book with a whole chapter on Jordan Peterson. I mean, he is.
Why are you platforming him?
Right, exactly. I mean, these guys they matter. Josh from Chicago, good results came from progressives. Progressive policy is talking about healthcare. The Dems won the House. Zoe, I attended the film premiere with an Iranian journalist and filmmaker, Mazer Bahari. The Iranian-Canadian journalist and filmmaker whose imprisonment in Iran for speaking out was subject of Jon Stewart's 2014 film Rosewater. He's made several films about the prosecution of Baha'i in Iran, the largest and most prosecuted minority religion there. That's right. Yeah, Baha'is, the Iranian constitution recognizes, obviously, Islam, but it actually does recognize and accord rights to Jews and Christians, and Baha'is are treated as full apostates and their property stolen. There's actually a massive amount of money that has basically just been stolen from Baha'is.
Yeah.
And Reza Aslan and I co-wrote a piece for the Washington Post several years ago about Baha'is in Iran, and it was true, and it's a really important issue, and it was used in some like Republican press release to try to like undermine the Iran deal or something, which is pretty funny. He said that the persecution of Baha'is is becoming a huge issue with millions of Iranians now supporting the Baha'is, some necessarily secretly. He thinks their treatment may be a primary issue. Has to be covering and resolving Iran can make progress. Currently, the Baha'is are still in prison, executed, houses burned down, banned from going to schools, having businesses, cemeteries desecrated, all because of their faith and unwillingness to deny it. Interview Mazari Bahari, creator of Journalism is Not a Crime campaign, among other human rights activists. I have his contact info. Well, you can send it. That's definitely an interview I would do. How much do you suppose voter suppression played in the elections? Also, I'm concerned that any request that the House makes will be contested by the White House until it's brought to the Supreme Court, where the president will get away with everything. I'm afraid this president will do whatever he wants, and like a slow-moving accident, all we can do is watch. Well, look, I don't see it that. I mean, I think that's probably true, and I still think you can bleed him out politically, right? Like, I think that will register in 2020 if the House is doing aggressive, smart oversight of all of the endless number of things coming out of this White House. And then, I mean, we are already in a fundamentally undemocratic place. And if it needs to be spelled out for people like that in the process of embarrassing and enraging Trump, then great. I mean, I'm not saying, I wish we weren't in this situation to begin with, but even the worst case scenario now is a better scenario than it was before. Of course, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been forced out. And he should be primarily remembered as a guy who explicitly took the gloves off of police departments. There was some modest reforms under Obama and Holder, arising out of the events in Ferguson, the rising up of activism across the country. Police violence.
I have never called Mr. Figure's boy.
I never quite believed that denial. Jeff Sessions also was an architect and really should be. His primary policy achievement was forcing families apart at the border. The torture and imprisonment, the terror campaign of children especially, but innocent families generally at the border. He was an arch far-right neo-Confederate who waged campaigns and also empowered anti-Muslim bigots. And, if Donald Trump wasn't, of course Donald Trump is a white supremacist and a racist and so on, but clearly his primary anxieties and motivations are around his own personal self-protection and enrichment and protecting himself from various criminal probes and so on and so forth. And, Sessions didn't protect him on that with this Mueller probe, so he freaked Trump out. But there is really no other way to think of Jeff Sessions than as a primary instrument of the worst of American life. And really the only good thing that came out of him the past couple of years was his recusal, which he should get no credit for. It was the obvious thing to do. He literally was involved in these investigations himself. He needed to do that, and only somebody with an absolute criminal view of the universe like Donald Trump would be upset that Sessions didn't recuse himself. And the only other thing that Sessions contributed was it was pretty funny watching Trump abuse and bully him, as owning and dunking on Republican cretins continues to be Donald Trump's greatest strength 2 years into his presidency.
Yeah, karma is not tactical, but it can be enjoyable.
Indeed. What is the video you have up here?
This is the new...
Okay, so let me get to this. This is great. So, you know, on some level, of course, it made sense that Jeff Sessions would be Trump's attorney general. Jeff Sessions, longtime far-right, racist, white identity politics, conspiracy theorist, neo-Confederate, reactionary, fueled by Breitbart and the scum of the Republican coalition. And that was, of course, the same scum wave that Trump rode to the presidency. And Sessions was an early endorser of Donald Trump. In other ways, it didn't make sense. As an example, Donald Trump obviously rides off of the enthusiasm of the South, but like most good New Yorkers, also seems to think that Southern people are like fucking idiots. He compared Jeff Sessions, because of his diminutive figure and his drawl, to a number of unflattering, Southern words like hick, and called him Mr. Magoo and so on. And I also have to say that I think Jeff Sessions' lack of business experience was probably also upsetting to Donald Trump. Now, the new acting attorney general is a guy named Matthew Whitaker, who looks like, and I think it plays into Trump's psyche because he literally looks like a bodyguard. And Trump obviously sees the job of the attorney general as to protect the president from, just basically endless potentials of exposing mass criminal wrongdoing.
No subpoena, thank you.
No, exactly.
Whitaker.
So the attorney general, in a sense, it's really a big bodyguard when you think about it. And so I think that Trump's damaged psyche is soothed by having a guy who looks like he should be saying ID, please, outside of some club in the meatpacking district as his AG. And another great thing about Matthew Whitaker is, of course, he said that the Mueller investigation has gone way too far. Trump is obviously itching to shut that down and could very well cause a constitutional crisis over the next coming weeks and months. And the real kicker, Matthew Whitaker is an Antifa motherfucking Nor. And I'm going to quote, yes, finally, someone with business sense. I'm going to quote now from a report in the Miami New Times, and then we have some great video of your new acting attorney general. Whitaker. Okay. Today, President Donald Trump fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions and announced that his chief of staff, Matthew Whitaker, would become an acting attorney general. Whitaker is a former U.S. attorney in Iowa, but he was also involved in a Miami-based invention marketing company. I love what you just say, like, invention marketing company is only going to come up in like a script of an Owen Wilson, Vince Vaughn vehicle from 2003 or 4, or in a Federal Trade Commission case. And indeed, and I'm back to the article, in a Miami-based invention marketing company that the Federal Trade Commission shut down last year after calling it a scam.
Regulations.
Getting in the way of small businessmen.
Get off our backs.
Whitaker not only sat on the board of the World Patent Marketing.
The best people on there.
Dude. World Patent Marketing.
You've come to the right place. Welcome to World Patent
We've
Marketing.
come to the right. Hey, do you have a great idea?
The best world patents you've ever seen.
Do you have a great idea and one more credit card that we could possibly extend out into the future to defraud you?
Just a quick sidebar. Did you see the story where Ivanka had been granted a number of patents by the Chinese government, including one for voting machines?
No, I did not.
Might need to dig into that later.
It sounds like another great piece of deal making there. Whitaker not only sat on the board of the World Patent Marketing, but also once sent a threatening email to a former customer who had complained after he spent thousands of dollars and did not receive promised services. I like what I'm hearing, Matthew.
Tell me more.
Court records obtained by the New Times for 2017 feature about the fraudulent companies shows that an August 2015 email to a disgruntled customer, Whitaker touted his background as a former federal attorney and suggested that filing a complaint with the Better Business Bureau and quote-unquote smearing the company online could result in, quote, serious civil and criminal consequences. The new patent, the acting attorney general also evaluated a razor invention submitted to World Patent Marketing in a video the customer shared on its Vimeo account 3 years ago, proclaiming that it had, quote, a simple but a unique design. Scott Cooper, the CEO and founder of World Patent Marketing, donated $2,600 to Whitaker's 2014 Senate campaign, just 100 shy of the limit for an individual to donate to a candidate. Internet internal records show the company paid him nearly $10,000 before the company was shuttered, and the company collected almost $26 million by promising, back to the quote, starry-eyed investors it would turn their inventions into best sellers.
Hell yeah.
So this was, of course, an incredible, a federally documented scam. And here is some footage now of the acting attorney general, the guy who's about to plunge us into a constitutional crisis, most likely, by shutting down a criminal probe, an independent investigation into the president and associates around him for, of course, potential relationship to the Russians. But again, as I always say, you have a team of money laundering experts combing through Donald Trump's finances, which means that you will probably find everything from like fake, scams to raise money for like the Little League that didn't go to the Little League to like, I don't know, laundering money for Panamanian cartels. Like, could you guess any other things that they would probably find roaming through Donald Trump's finances? I can imagine literally anything. And this is Matthew Whitaker. You know why I keep thinking of Mark Whitaker is I think Mark Whitaker was the guy in the Archer Daniels Midland case who exposed fraud at that company, but was also defrauding the company himself. It's a good movie. It's called The Informant with Matt Damon.
Drain the Swamp.
Drain the Swamp. This is Matthew Whitaker telling you about a great invention.
Swivel seat, because it's a unique design that's going to help lots of people that have mobility issues get in and use their hot tub in a safe manner.
Can we play that one more time, please? This is the acting attorney general who will probably shortly be throwing our country into a constitutional crisis.
That's $1 billion idea, Matthew.
Swivel seat, because it's a unique design that's going to help lots of people that have mobility issues get in and use their hot tub in a safe manner.
It doesn't look very safe to me, I will say that.
It looks literally like a school chair that has been like platformed and nailed onto the edge of a hot tub, which could break off at any moment.
Yeah, it looks like a good way to dump somebody mobily challenged into a hot tub.
It looks like a good example for a Steve Bannon hooker joke.
Nobody would insure this invention.
Yeah. It is the perfect invention for like a fraudster Trump aligned guy, though, in Florida.
You know who else was a patent clerk? Albert Einstein.
Yeah. But they didn't say anything bad about him. See, that's how unfair I'm treated by the media. Everybody says Albert Einstein's a great guy, but meanwhile...
He's going to figure out nuclear fusion.
He's going to figure out...
From the HE position.
But all of a sudden, it's a big joke because you're so hateful. Is there a doctored video where the Majority Report calls him something anti-Semitic that Breitbart did that we could send around?
I'm just trying to imagine Albert Einstein reviewing a patent submission for a swivel chair on a hot tub.
I don't even know. What is the Albert Einstein voice? Some type of like... I don't remember. Was he Swiss? Swiss Jewish man? Like, this is really good because there are...
The common language of science. The first step towards language was...
This is very good because there are people who cannot access their hot tubs because of a disability.
It's a shame that history went a little bit different. We might remember German voice as Albert Einstein voice and not
that is really depressing,
barking Nazi
isn't it?
voice.
Right. Because I'm doing that voice, and I'm like, shouldn't I be saying something disgusting and anti-Semitic versus cracking the code of the universe in this genteel way? You're calling from a 647 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Sebastian from Canada.
Hey, Sebastian. What's going on, man?
Dude, I called a couple days ago, and like 5 seconds into my call, I got raided by a SWAT team and got taken to a neoliberal re-education camp.
Oh, okay.
You remember that?
No.
Oh, well, anyway, I got caught in the middle of my call, and I don't know what happened, but yeah, I want to talk about Canada.
Okay, what's up? What's going on in Canada, man?
Okay, well, so I liked your video about Jagmeet Singh.
Oh, that was a while ago, yeah.
Yeah, well, I actually just got into the show, and so basically I just been like going through YouTube clips, right?
Oh, cool.
And so yeah, I just kind of want to talk about like his situation right now.
So tell us his situation right now.
I got to be honest, it's not looking too good.
Why not?
Okay, well, first of all, he doesn't have a seat in the parliament yet. So that means he would have to run in a by-election to get in.
Mm-hmm.
And Trudeau has been delaying the by-election like month after month. And now...
Sebastian, are you there? Sebastian. I think he got taken away again. Oh, it's weird. Yeah, he does need to get a secure line. See, people don't want...
They don't safe house.
They don't want Sebastian to talk to us. They don't want Sebastian to win. But you know what we're going to do for Sebastian? Let's trash Justin Trudeau a little bit. There's a couple of things about this clip that come to mind. First, Justin Trudeau is really he's a super awkward public speaker. I get that he's, I get that he's attractive and he's, I guess, likable. I don't find him particularly likable, but what has shocked me is that people compared this guy to Obama. Like, people really wanted to sort of attach like serious rock star cred to him, and I've never seen him give a solid speech. Now, granted, I don't watch much Justin Trudeau, so maybe there's, don't point me. I'll take your word for it. If he's giving great speeches, I believe you, but don't tweet them to me. The other thing that's very interesting is, look, I don't discount. I think it's great when the Australian government apologizes to Aboriginal people. I think it's important when the United States government apologizes to the victims of the Tuskegee experiment. I think historical accounts are important and healthy for any society. That being said, Justin Trudeau's sort of preferred mode of apologizing for things in the past while he condones atrocities in the present is a troubling pattern. And I'll be really specific about that. This guy continues to align with the oil and energy industry against Indigenous activists in Canada. That is a specific wrong today. I don't care how woke you are. That's wrong. They did have that conflict with Saudi Arabia because, to their credit, Canada's foreign minister, I believe, Krista Freeland, I believe her name is, spoke out against some of the Saudi jailing of women's rights activists. And the Saudis responded by by threatening another 9/11, which was a bit of an escalation, but also by talking about canceling arms agreements, which should remind everybody that Canada is selling Saudi Arabia weapons. So this woke administration is still a arms exporting petrostate that has not kept its commitments or its word to the coalition that elected it, and continues to treat Indigenous people in an abysmal way. So this is Justin Trudeau apologizing for a great historical wrong that Canada committed against the Jewish people, those fleeing the Holocaust. And then he's going to pivot to a disingenuous, ridiculous, historically illiterate attack on the movement to bring democracy to Israel-Palestine.
Anti-Semitism is still far too present. Jewish institutions and neighborhoods are still being vandalized with swastikas. Jewish students still feel unwelcomed and uncomfortable on some of our college and university campuses because of BDS-related intimidation. And out of our entire community of nations, it is Israel whose right to exist is most widely and wrongly questioned. Discrimination and violence against Jewish people in Canada and around the world continues at an alarming rate.
So he's conflating several things there that are disturbing and actually undermine the necessary, urgent, and of course, historically ongoing fight against the poison of anti-Semitism, which is that, yes, there is a resurgence of anti-Semitism. Also, anti-Semitism never went away. And there are far-right terrorist actions like swastikas, like murdering people in synagogues, that are a dangerous, clear and present threat to Jewish people in the United States and in Europe and, of course, elsewhere. Then he conflated BDS. Now, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel, is in often cases, on college campuses at least, has Jewish leadership inside it. There are a lot of younger Jewish leaders that do not want to support an apartheid state in their name in Israel. Some of those people support BDS because they don't believe in ethno-states of any kind, and they want a full binational democracy with equal citizenship for all people in Israel-Palestine, Jewish, Palestinian, Christian, Arab, Bedouin, and so on. They believe in full multiracial, multicultural democracy, which is in fact the values of modern liberal society. That's why somebody like Tony Judt, who was a great social democratic and liberal theorist and Jewish intellectual, came out in the New York Review of Books in 2005 and supported a binational democracy because he recognized that his lifelong intellectual project to undermine nationalism and promote openness and democracy for all was contradicted by living in an ethno-state. It's also why former Israeli senior top-level politicians have also supported binational policies as well. There's others who actually do support Israel existing as a democracy, a Jewish democracy within 67 borders, but recognize that a ruthless siege on Gaza and an occupation on the West Bank make Israel an objective apartheid state by international standards. So, and in most of these groups, any actual talk of anti-Semitism or conspiracy theories about Jews controlling the world or essentializing of Jewish identity is aggressively disputed and opposed. So if some people on college campuses feel uncomfortable because Israel is being criticized from a political perspective, well, that is analogous to somebody from Turkey saying, I'm uncomfortable because you're criticizing what you do to the Kurds or what Erdogan is doing to the free press, or somebody from Pakistan being uncomfortable because you might criticize Islamic politics in Pakistan. It's ridiculous. You need to grow up. You need to deal with reality. And third, by conflating and then, of course, turning to uncritical support of Israel, he's conflating a political question, a moral question, and one of dealing with actual and serious and the urgent threats of anti-Semitism all in one thing. At the very same time that this current Israeli government has made more reach out to the global far right and historically anti-Semitic forces than any previous Israeli government ever. It's disgusting and delusional. And Justin Trudeau should be ashamed of himself.
Come on, Canada.
Yeah, seriously. You got to upgrade that shit. You're calling from a 914 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Is it me?
Yep.
Hi, this is Elle. I'm from Westchester, New York.
Hey, Elle, what's going on?
Hi, I'm calling the first time, long time. I'm calling because I saw an article in the Telegraph yesterday about a Dutchman I'm transgender.
Okay.
I saw an article about a Dutch man who wants to change his birth record so that he is 20 years younger than he actually is. And he's claiming that because transgender people can change their sex or gender on their birth records, and because his doctor says that he has the body of a man 20 years younger than he is, he can do this. And it's sort of puzzling to me because it feels like a thing that, bigots will use against people like me, like Ben Shapiro.
They will. They will.
And yeah, I was just curious about like that because it reminds me a lot of like the Rachel Dolezal stuff with the transracialism, and like this is just another area of that. I wonder like what you guys thought of that.
Well, I think that you're right that it will be used by bigots, and I think that in fact they already were. They used they made up examples like this when they didn't even exist. And look, in some ways, like even with Rachel Dolezal, all of these things require contextualization and reality checks, right? So if you took, and Adolph Reed actually wrote a piece that I think did shed some light on this, and he actually kind of made the point that actually, yes, race and gender are both ascriptive things, right? And they aren't essential. So in a way, he actually defended, his sort of argument was not to defend Rachel Dolezal per se, though he kind of did actually, to be honest. I think partially just to provoke people, but to actually say that like Rachel Dolezal doesn't undermine transgender identity at all. And in fact, if you want to go in one direction, certainly with regards to race and gender, from a intellectual perspective, you can both sort of, those identities as we culturally define them are obviously very fluid and very shaky by definition. And then obviously there's a problem with a white person assuming black identity in the real world, right? And so that's like where you're going to have to make the distinction. So I guess like my instinct when I get confronted with some like logic lord nonsense, like, oh, this is the same thing, is to just, and maybe I fall short because I don't have a logic lord response to it. I just have a common sense response, which is it's a ludicrous comparison. And even just by sort of the range of ways that we talk about gender as an example are far broader, even in sort of common usage, than we talk about age. I guess people talk about common versus biological versus chronological age, but age mostly denotes something really clear, which is like literally your age, how many years you've been on the planet, right? Gender.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is the judge? I think it was the judge or somebody involved in this case made the point that who is the child from the age of from 1949 to 1969? What's going to happen to him? Is he just erased? Or what? Like, you can't do that, but you can physically change your gender. You can't undo time.
Well, and also there's just the way that, and I'm not articulating this well, but it's like even somebody like, I was talking with a guy who wrote a book, a logic professor named Ben Burgess, actually. And he's writing a book for Zero Books on how like the left can reclaim logic, facts, and reason, actually, which I actually think is kind of worthwhile in these sort of like flame wars. And he's a very smart guy. And he was saying that also like one of the things that trips up these stupid analogies is also just even in common usage, like, again, age has a very limited definition, whereas people talk about and gender in a multitude of ways, even just in like everyday expressions. So like somebody could be like, oh, this person's like a mother to me, right? Like that denotes a gender identity and expression. And that sort of puts even like a fluidity of relationship of like, okay, well, obviously we know there are mothers and fathers who aren't the literal biological parents of a child, right? Like these concepts are definitionally way more complicated and way more meaningful to someone's identity than simply a sort of number. So I guess, I wish I had something tighter as a counter argument right now, but part of it just honestly, I think in my mind does have to just be like, you're comparing, apples and skyscrapers and being an asshole, incidentally.
Exactly.
I don't know if that works, but do you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
it's a stupid fucking comparison. Like, but.
Yeah. I had one more thing I wanted to ask you about, because I see, a lot of things like this with, the Trump floating that legislation,
right.
Against transgender people. And I'm not hearing like a lot of people from my perspective talking about this. Do you have any like advice for somebody who maybe wants to start a podcast similar to this, but from a queer perspective, how to get that started?
I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't, because just start, honestly, the literal mechanics of starting it are really simple, like you can, do you have anything slightly more specific, Al, in terms of
the first question I would ask is do you want to do a podcast or do you want to do a YouTube channel? Do you want to do all these other things? Because a YouTube channel is going to grow a lot faster. You're going to be beholden to YouTube, and there's also more investment in that. Podcast is nice because you just need some mics and some recording equipment, but that's also some investment too, especially if you have more than a few people.
No, but honestly, you could record a podcast on your phone.
Yeah, the best advice for a
start it very simply.
You can, and usually people give leeway for the first like dozen or so episodes for technical things. But I would say that the thing with podcasts is people like to see that you've done it and will continue to do it for a while. Like, you can't expect anybody to really, probably really listen to it until you've probably done like 50 of them, unless you have lucky enough to have a platform where you can push more people to them. But even then, you kind of just have to do it and get into the flow and see if it's something that you can persist in. And then otherwise it's sort of social media marketing and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And
that's a great answer.
Yeah. So, but go do it. That would be a valuable podcast for us to have.
Awesome. Yeah. One last thing. I'm in the IMs as ESC Hatch. I just wanted to point out that Sam has been saying it as Schatch. It's a play on my name. It's Escape Hatch. So next time I write in, can you just make sure that he says it right?
I can't promise.
We cannot promise
to
anything,
ever make sure
Sam doesn't say elected officials' names correctly, so don't.
Yeah,
don't
Sam's
feel too
not
bad
going to
about
say
it.
anything.
There are people who have been IMing for longer than I've been listening to this show, who he never pronounces their name right.
Awesome. Great. Awesome. Great.
I don't know if it's great, but it's the truth. All right.
Well, I'll take it as a badge of honor and love.
It is a badge of honor
guys.
and love. All right. Thanks, Al.
Yeah.
So in Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro is on the verge. He's getting inaugurated. He's going to become president soon, and he's promising to raise the wages of court people on the Supreme Court and other judicial members of the judicial branch in Brazil. The judicial branch in Brazil has been aggressively working to unwind and destroy Brazilian democracy for quite some time now, and there's a couple of things that I just want to touch on. One, with Democrats taking control of Congress, this is a prime and essential time to thank people like Bernie Sanders and Keith Ellison. I guess actually Keith Ellison's now on his way to being Attorney General in Minnesota, which is another good result from last Tuesday. But Ro Khanna, Bernie Sanders, Barbara Lee, Mark Pocan from Wisconsin's been great on this. But also people that haven't spoken up yet. I can't believe. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez should be talking about the threat to Brazilian communities of color, to the Amazon, to the judicial coup, to freeing Lula da Silva as now the world's most prominent political prisoner. This is a time to really align with and be serious about solidarity with Brazil across the board. And we see with the wage increases for the judiciary, the fact that the judiciary not only imprisoned Lula on the flimsiest of evidence, but silenced him during the whole presidential campaign. This is a country where drug cartel heads and murderers have film crews sent into prison to interview them. They did not let the press speak to Lula once. They ignored international recommendations. They ignored calls from across the globe for a restoration of democratic rights so he could run for president, an election he absolutely would have won. And now Sergio Moro, who was the special prosecutor, a judge, a guy who served as both prosecutor and judge. In Brazilian law, they did not reform a law going back to the Inquisition where somebody could play both of those roles at once. And he obsessively and savagely went after Lula and used a broad corruption scandal which exposed massive corruption across the board in Brazil. That's a structural problem in Brazilian politics, used as a weapon to delegitimize the Workers' Party and destroy and make Lula a political prisoner. He's now accepted a job as justice minister of Bolsonaro and has gladly looked the other way on extensive illegal campaign violations under the Bolsonaro campaign. They used an illegal slush fund to spread fake news through WhatsApp, as an example. This does not concern Sergio Moro, but a case that he could not prove about a condo that he claimed was given to Lula. He sentenced Lula to 12 years in prison for literally what they call indeterminate acts. So this remains the case in Brazil, and we are going to need to put a lot of work in the United States towards making sure that that situation does not completely unravel. So as it's been said, Brazil elected a fascist president, but they don't have a fascist regime yet. And pressure from the North on rights, on democracy, and of course, in trying to attack all of the Wall Street and petrochemical companies that have supported the coup in Brazil, the coup against Dilma, the political imprisonment of Lula, and now a fascist who is promising to politically, socially, and ethnically cleanse the country, is of paramount importance.
I just recommend a book by Ira Katz-Nelson called Fear Itself, which is about the New Deal and the origins of our time, which talks about, I think, maybe the last time we had a genuine global rise of fascism, and how it was dealt with. I think it's really good. And it's also, I mean, we were talking about this before the show, but reading history when it's totally foobar, like it is, like it was at this point in time, there's something oddly comforting about it, given our current times. Like it's a weird form of escapism to escape to some real point in history that was maybe more acute than ours is now. I mean, of course, we have climate change.
And the motivation, right? We have climate change.
Blah, blah,
and
blah,
also, and climate change is very implicated by what's happening in Brazil. With his plans to sell off the Amazon to American and Canadian and Chinese corporations. The only hiccup he's had so far is moving the embassy to Jerusalem is pissing off people in the Middle East, and there's a huge meat export market from Brazil to the Middle East. So he's actually been sort of backpedaling on that a little bit.
Oh yeah, I can't do Brazilian grills anymore.
That's right.
Damn it.
And you could do all the Brazilian grills you wanted when the Workers' Party was in power.
I was maybe that's what made Brazilian grills so tasty, is Lula wasn't.
Yeah, man, Lula smiling down it. Obviously people know I'm a big Lula fan, and someone sent me a picture once, a Brazilian friend of mine, and it was a paparazzi photo from like 2009 when Lula was still president. And it was like Lula just with some buddies going down to the beach carrying like a bucket of beer on his head. I was like, this guy is pretty fucking awesome. You're calling from a 317 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Is this me?
Yep.
Hey.
Hey, what's up?
Just a second. Well, I wanted to talk about, this is Adam from Indianapolis.
Okay, hey Adam, what's going on?
This is Adam the animator. I did the Richard Wolf.
Oh, Adam the animator. Wait. Well, actually, Richard Wolf wants to see that, and he's going to be on TMBS on November 27th, and we talked about it in Boise. So actually, your animation of Richard Wolf, David Harvey, and Slavoj Žižek ground stomping David Grisham, which we played on TMBS, is now known by Richard Wolf. So, Adam, thank you.
That's hilarious.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you're quite welcome. That was a lot of fun to make. I wanted to share some good news coming out of the Indiana elections.
Okay.
Because it was, Donnelly was an absolute disgrace and a terrible candidate and did a horrible job in the lead up. And it should be noted the only reason he won the first time, and you mentioned it previously, was that his opponent said in their final debate that sometimes rape is God's will, and bottomed out his approval rating, and Donnelly won because of that.
Right.
Literally the only reason
Right.
that he was in there. But there were some really good results. 36-year-old J.D. Ford is now the first gay lawmaker in the Indiana State House.
Awesome.
We flipped 5 State House seats and overperformed in 7 of the 9 districts by 3 to 18 points. So it shows that Republican enthusiasm is not where it was when in 2016. So
yeah,
and good news out of Indiana.
There's no doubt, and no, I appreciate that. And state races and state houses and local races are unbelievably important. And I actually think I'll probably talk more about this on TMBS, but I do think, because I don't want to over exaggerate it, especially in the context of kind of like a day-to-day coverage of federal elections, but on the local and state levels, there were some very positive signals with DSA candidates. I mean, DSA candidate won a judgeship in Houston.
Yeah, Houston and Dallas judgeships are what happened in Texas, and Beto didn't win, but he won basically.
Oh, and by the way, and I would say that race was close enough now where you actually could probably pretty confidently say that if the National Party and some other forces were potentially brought to bear there a little bit earlier, he might actually won that thing. So I think, even in Indiana, I mean, there's a lot of positive signals. And there's also some, I mean, you now have several new people in the House that are like good, right? And I totally agree. I think Bhaskar Sunkar is right. He said that there needs to be a Democratic Socialist Caucus, which people like Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, hopefully will join, and others. And there's good things that happen, including in Indiana. So thanks for the news, man.
Oh yeah, there was one other stat which was really interesting to me. This is John from San Antonio stat, but in Tippecanoe County, where Purdue University is based, the average voting age, the median voting age from 2016 to 2018 dropped from like 45 to 27.
Oh wow, that's great.
So there's a lot of young people voting there, and that whole county went blue, and like hard blue. So that was very interesting.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the call, Adam. Be in touch.
Thanks for having me.
All right, bye. So guys, I don't know. Andrew Gillum is only down now 0.6% in the recount. Apparently, I'm seeing on the IM. And in the packet, as of this morning, the Senate race and the governor's race were both headed to recounts as of Wednesday morning. And DeSantis, I guess, was as of this morning. Okay, he was up 0.7%, which is outside of the margin of 0.5, which would entitle Gillum to a recount demand. So if we're down to 0.6, obviously that's closer to the 0.5, which then will legally entitle Andrew Gillum to a recount. Now, I don't think it doesn't really make any difference, frankly, that he already conceded. I wouldn't have done that. And I think it's great that Stacey Abrams is going right in to the runoff. And I think we should be staying. And Brian Kemp did enough. The Georgia race was stolen. Period. That amount of suppression, irregularities, and double dipping as Secretary of State, that's a stolen election. And even as Samantha Power acknowledged, if she saw that happen in any other country, or maybe she was being honest, any other country the United States wasn't supporting, she would be demanding action on it at the United Nations. Georgia election, stolen. Go into that runoff aggressively, clearly, and keep up the fight on absolutely all fronts. And in Florida, I think that might still be in play. I mean, I don't want to give people false hope. And I think in other ways,
always fight it. Don't take shit for granted from these people.
Always fight it. Never concede any ground.
That's why Abrams is the perfect person to be where she is right now, fighting for the. Well, I guess they're already doing the runoff, so it's not even like they have to fight this in the courts.
Exactly. But her attitude of like, oh, so I'm seeing now is it 0.47% in Florida now? If that IM is true, then we're getting to automatic recount. But I'm also seeing that Kemp might have gotten over 50%, which would mean I guess there isn't a recount, a runoff. But there still should be challenge them in courts. What people should do is in 2006 in Mexico, AMLO, who was the incoming Mexican progressive president, lost an election that most observers and certainly his campaign thought was stolen. And he waged a months-long sit-in and protest rallies and even alternative swearing in downtown Mexico City. And they should do the same thing in Atlanta for a stolen election. Kemp is at 50.3 and Gillum is already at the machine recount level, and they're still counting Georgia ballots. Okay. Yeah.
In other news, Eric Swalwell from California representative has declared his candidacy for 2020.
Wait, who is Eric Swalwell?
He's like a Pelosi's boy.
And he's running for president?
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of here. I love the. What is his what is he even, what district does he represent in California? Nate from KC in Missouri, McCaskill mailed out pictures of her walking the middle road and pleading "I'm not Bernie" for her closing argument. Lost while anti-gerrymandering, minimum wage increase, and medical marijuana won big. Right to work was struck down by a vote in August. The 2020 Democrat in New Jersey would be stupid not to run on Medicaid expansion and building a labor coalition. The roadmap in this Trump state is clear. I 100% agree with that. And I think there is, in fact, I mean, Missouri's got a lot of South in it. Let's be real. But I think another way in which...
Southern South, what we're talking about.
That's right. But I also think another way in which this economics, like these arguments get, another way they're dumbed down is like, what's getting locked in rural Southern and including like the rural Missouri of this white identity politics is very different, again, than the black voters in Milwaukee that didn't vote, the handful but vitally necessary group of people that were scammed by Trump who are already tapping out. And undoubtedly it is both right on the merits and the most politically advantageous to talk about Medicaid expansion and labor. I mean, nobody would argue against that. It's just acting as if that would have won Andrew Gillum the race and it wasn't racism that made this anything other than a blowout for Gillum. Because frankly, what human being would look at those two and not vote for Andrew Gillum unless they had very weird racial hangups?
Or fairly typical racial hangups.
Or very, right. Typical bizarre racial hangups. Secret identity politics. Good riddance to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, the worst attorney general of our time. Trump was willing to put up with him in spite of his recusal from the Russia investigation precisely because Sessions has the pedigree, the history, and the policy know-how to put brown people in cages. We can add him to the list of freaks brought down by the midterm elections. Also, Sam is right about Ohio, where I live. The place is full of lunatics who jump in between fantasizing about shooting into a crowd and thinking about what the best Dairy Queen dessert is. I wish that was the final IM of the day. Fantasizing in between shooting into a crowd and the best Dairy Queen dessert. All right, we got to take two more calls and then we are out of here. So we got to be real quick. You're calling from a 314 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, I'm Rich from Missouri.
Hey, Rich, what's going on?
I just want to make a quick point. In Missouri, we voted against right to work. We raised our minimum wage. We
literally just read this IM. Did you just IM this as well? Yeah, I just read it.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, okay. Well, but at the same time, we also put in a guy who's like on the other side of all that stuff in the Senate.
Yep, no doubt.
And this is not the first time. And apparently, I think other states have the same problem. We have these liberal issues, and the same people who put Republicans into office then turn around and vote for like liberal stuff like, expanding Medicaid or medical marijuana. And I think there's a disconnect between, not only what what people think the Democrats stand for, but what they think the Republicans stand for. It's like, they don't. I don't know. So
well, I think again, I think that there's, as far as that goes, it's still the same conclusion, which is all Democrats, in my view, because it is it's essentially because it's the right policy. The only place I can imagine where running some type of Claire McCaskill campaign might work would be like in an affluent suburb somewhere. So if you're running in Missouri, what you do is you say, look, I'm not with it. And you don't even believe I'm with it, frankly, on the xenophobia and the other bullshit. We disagree. And there's all these other things that you people, well, you wouldn't say you people, but you know what I mean. Like you guys, listen, you fucking idiots. No, yeah, because I think Republicans respond to negging. So what I would say is, hey, listen, you fucking mouth-breathing morons. You don't want right to work? How about you don't vote like a fucking idiot and send me to the Senate? No, but you make the case on all of those issues. And I think with some people it will work. I think on a ton of them it won't, because it's one thing to vote the right way in a ballot initiative, and then when you're voting for candidates, you're voting in this more totalizing way. And then it just goes back to simple fucking electoral coalitions, which is like turn out St. Louis, have labor in your corner, and then cut the margins a little bit in other places, and then that's maybe your path. And I do think part of that is, of course, being incredibly strong on universal health care and labor, particularly in places that do still have like Midwest labor activity. Yeah, no doubt.
Though Missouri Democrats, I don't know if Claire McCaskill is, but Missouri Democrats at least did actually try to make that connection. It's like, hey, do you vote against right to work? You should vote Democrat. And for some reason that didn't quite click, because people who voted against right to work voted for Josh Hawley.
Right.
And that just doesn't make any sense. It's like, it's like these things are totally separate. So that's just the point I wanted to make.
Yeah, I hear you.
I don't think it's just Missouri. I think it's all over. I heard three red states expanded Medicare.
Definitely. Thanks for the call, man.
So,
no, I think you're totally right. And as I said, I mean, yeah, it's hard to work around that. All right, final call of the day. You're calling from a 478 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael, this is Jeff from Georgia. Hello there.
Hello, Jeff from Georgia. What's up?
Touched on it a little bit. I was going to make some things plain about this Georgia's governor's race. Obviously, things are still up in the air here, but just to give you a few facts for you and your audience, the spread's about 60K votes.
Okay.
That's not that many.
Nope.
Kemp has already resigned today as Secretary of State as around noon. Before he did it, he loudly proclaimed to all who would hearken to him that he won a clean and convincing victory. He literally said those words. And I think if you're declaring victory and you have to remind people how clean and convincing it was, it certainly weren't that.
He stole it.
He claims there aren't enough. I'm sorry.
It's voter suppression. He stole it. It's not legitimate. Fuck him.
No, absolutely. Last thing is that he claims there's not enough provisional ballots or absentee ballots to force a runoff or flip the race. He will not say how many ballots there are left to count, which tells you all you need to know about how credible that claim is. Kemp deregistered hundreds of thousands of voter registrations since he took office. He rejected tens of thousands more. He rejected thousands of absentee ballots. He oversaw a lack of voting machines, logistical support for elections in the state. What I mean to make plain is he's definitely covered his margin of victory many times over with these antics. So if you believe that legitimate authority is derived from popular will and nowhere else, so we don't have that in Georgia. In many ways we may never really have, but I think this is a new level of brazenness that people need to be aware of.
Absolutely. We'll keep on it. Appreciate the call. Thanks, man. All right. Sorry, no more calls today. We're going to play this. Is this a Vic Berger thing for us to play?
Vic Berger has worked his magic on the Acosta thing.
Okay.
miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would be much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President, if I may ask one other question, are you worried?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
that's enough. Honestly, that's enough.
That's enough. Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation? Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
Oh, that was great. I saw an IM. Guys, I think I didn't have time to get into it. It looks to me that this Daily Beast headline is totally dishonest and misleading about Bernie.
But he also, he's clumsily saying it's not necessarily racist. If you saw that part, right?
I didn't see that part.
Yeah, he said people aren't necessarily racist if they didn't vote for Gillum because of, look,
let me also just say this. Whether it's Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama or Joe Biden, politicians are not going to say what I will say. So I'm not condoning, I need to read the interview. I saw that the headline made it sound very different than what he said in substance. He absolutely did acknowledge racism and voting patterns. And he also, bottom line is, though, no potential national candidate is going to speak that bluntly. Period. So and it does not mean that it's an excuse to not be totally unequivocal about racism and about the merits of policies and all of it. I think to expect and go with the strategy of a still potential major swing state to just say like, oh yeah, they were all just racist bums, you're just not going to hear that from anybody. Nobody's going to say that. Right or wrong. Nobody's going to say that. And instantly I would say, right. If you didn't vote for Andrew Gillum, you are almost certainly a racist bum. But I'm not running for president yet. And hopefully by the time we all run for office, that will be par for the course.
I can't wait. I'm going to be throwing bombs, not literally, in Fargo Congress race.
Frank, hey, Michael, in fairness to Acosta, when you're a white correspondent, they let you do whatever you want. Okay. Chris Lepaco, it's time for members of the press corps to stand in solidarity with Jim Acosta and start punching interns at the White House. All right, the final IM of the day. No board for me, huh? Vespa, the informant with Matt Damon's fantastic, one of my favorites. And you're right, his name was Mark Whitaker. Yeah, it's a great movie. We're back live, everybody, tomorrow. Thanks.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101